10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 335. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 335 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Wonderful to have you back in. This week we're going to continue our series on the great Lester Young. We're going to take a look at 4 more examples of his simple, amazing, swinging playing. Try to get a little bit of that simplification back in our playing. It doesn't always need to be so complicated, and that's one thing that Lester can really teach us. But before we jump into the episode, like always, want to remind you this is a listener-supported podcast, which means that we rely on listeners just like you to support the show in the form of a small monthly donation. We do use the Patreon platform, and if you want to know more about what you get in return, a PDF and audio examples for every single episode, visit our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and you can find out everything you need to know about supporting the show and becoming a member of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family. Quick shout out to our new patrons this week. Thank you to our new $5 patrons, Mark, Lauren, Cindy, and Sal, and to our new $3 patron, Frank. Thank you so much for joining up, and to the over 350 people we have supporting the show over there. Thank you. We could not do this show without you. So again, if you want to make sure that this podcast keeps coming out week in and week out in high quality, consider becoming a member. You can do that by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, and getting yourself signed up today for instant access to all those materials. All right, so this week we continue with Lester Young, and this episode is going to be more examples of what I was talking about in the last episode, which is the fact that the harmonic language that Lester Young was using was nowhere near as advanced as the harmonic language of Charlie Parker and the bebop movement and after, but I would argue that it's just as effective in terms of keeping a listener's interest and really swinging and just sounding beautiful. So it's a great reminder to us as musicians in the year 2022, when there's so much harmonic information out there and so many things that we feel we need to learn in terms of tension and release and, learning all the harmonic innovations of everybody that came before us. It's sort of a reminder that simplicity can still be just as effective as playing really complicated stuff. And studying the music of Lester Young has a great way of reminding us of this fact and reminding us that sometimes we don't always need to be finding the latest and hippest harmonic innovation, and that we should have a little bit of this simplicity available to us in our playing. So we're going to look at 4 more examples of the way that Lester kind of handles cadences, particularly the 2-5-1 cadence, in a really simple way. So let's dive into the first example, which is a 2-5 in the key of concert F. And what we're going to see is one of the most simple lines that I have ever seen, but also really effective. Let's listen to it and then we'll chat about it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that was example number 1 on your PDF this week. And honestly, is there a better example of simplicity in action? This is 3 notes. Okay, so what he's focusing on is over the 1 chord, over the F major chord. He's focusing on the 3rd, the 5th, and then he throws in the minor 3rd 1 time. We hear it once. Other than that, though, it is just 2 notes. It's the 3 going up to the 5. But it's the way that he frames it is just so amazing. He's using a really swinging rhythm, and the way he places the notes in the measure and the way he utilizes that flat 3rd and then comes back to the major 3rd on the downbeat of the 1 chord, that just makes it amazing. So if you're ever in doubt that simplicity in jazz works, come back to this lick and think about the way and the boldness with which Lester Young is literally using 3 notes over a 2-5-1 and how effective it is. All right, let's go on to example number 2, a little bit more notey, but also still very harmonically uncomplicated, if that makes sense. The way I said that was really weird, but you understand what I'm saying. It's not a very complicated line. So let's hear it, and then we'll chat. This is example number 2 on your PDF. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. So what we hear this time is a short 2-5 in concert C, and let's investigate the notes here. So if we frame this in the key of C, what we see first is the 4th to the 5th, coming down to the 3rd, back to the 4th, back to the 3rd, back to the 5th, back to the 3rd, and then the rest of it is on the root. So let's add up those notes in total. There's only 4 notes. Now, the way that he has played those notes, the rhythm which he has used them, is more complicated than our last example, but only 4 notes. Now, notice another thing. They are all diatonic to the key of C. There's nothing that is outside of the key of C major in this particular lick. So those two things combined, only the use of 4 notes and the fact that he's not really outlining, the 2 or the 5. He's really just outlining the key of C is another great lesson in simplicity, and a great lesson in the fact that we don't always need to be doing crazy chromatic stuff. We don't always need to be using chord substitutions. We don't always need to be using enclosures, all that kind of stuff. If we can really figure out, and this is actually a great limit to place on yourself in the practice room, you can only use diatonic notes over a 2-5-1 from the key of the 1. And just see what you can do. This is actually a really big challenge, especially if you have studied bebop for your entire life. You're going to want to reach for all of those things that you use, all of those devices. And it's exactly the same for me. But if you place those restrictions on yourself, you might just find yourself creating new ways to play through old familiar chords, and you might break some of the habits in your playing, some of the cliches that you play. All right, let's go on to example number 3. This is a 2-5 back in the key of F major. Let's check this one out. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. I think this one might be my favorite one of the week out of the 4 examples. Again, a really, really great use of rhythmic variety. Again, I will draw your attention to the fact that this is diatonic to the key of F, but this is really kind of a study in triplets. So we see that in the first measure and the second measure, he's using 8th note triplets that are tied, which is adding to the interest of it. And then in the third measure, he uses that 16th note triplet. I will also draw your attention to the fact that this line is actually based around a concert E. He's really highlighting that concert E as the note that your ears are hearing throughout this entire 2-5-1. And what a beautiful note it is. It is the major 7th over the 1 chord. So really dive into that line and think about all of those concert E's, where he's using them, how he's using them. And then maybe what you can do is either, put on a backing track for a 2-5-1 and try to use that major 7th sound over it, or you can write out some of your own lines, trying to utilize that concert E in a way that sounds good to you, using Lester as kind of a role model, as a model for this. All right, let's dive into the 4th and final example. This is another 2-5 in the key of concert F. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're starting to see a theme here. Notice how simple it is. Notice that he's actually centering the line around that concert E again. And notice the fact that there are very, very few notes until the last two measures. He plays one phrase, he slightly changes it in measure 2, and that slight change is enough. All of the notes are diatonic yet again, and I think you're starting to see why I've chosen to present this collection of licks to you in this episode. How simple they are, how effective they are, and how this can completely change your thinking from I want to make something as complicated as possible to I don't care how complicated it is, and I want to make something as beautiful and effective to the listener as possible. Those are the thoughts that I want going through your head after you study these licks a little bit and listen to a little bit more Lester Young, all that kind of stuff. So let me know if you have any questions. Remember, if you want to get these 4 licks in the form of a PDF and you get audio examples and everything else, make sure you go and support this podcast on the Patreon platform. You can do that by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, getting yourself signed up today for instant access to all those materials. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you're finding this stuff interesting, and we will catch you next week with a brand new episode. Have a good one, everybody. Bye.